touchdown, Alabama, let's get it.
The process, no one can stop this. Hottest show in the streets, I bet you can't top this. Rammer, jammer, yellow hammer, come see how we rock this. Alabama fans the best, there's no way you can top this. Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
The process.
Hey everyone, welcome into The Process Crimson Tide Recruiting. I am your host, Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine. Thank you guys so much for joining me on Thursday's show. This is the first and last show of the week, as I was unable to do the show Tuesday evening because I was covering the first practice of this year's Alabama-Mississippi All-Star event. Be sure to check out all of our coverage from the event so far. Also, be sure to check out the footage that we have for one of the practices that is posted on our YouTube page. We will have more content as the week go on from this particular event. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button below if you're not subscribed to Touchdown Alabama on YouTube. Also, be sure to leave a like as well. On this episode, I actually want to talk about some of the rumblings surrounding the Tide's 2021 recruiting efforts heading into the early signing period, with it officially being less than a week away. So I wanted to dive into that on this episode of The Process. But before I dive into all of that, I do have a couple of recruiting updates to hit you guys with, so we are going to roll into those. So with that being said, let's get the process started. Let's dive into a couple of quick recruiting updates. As I said earlier, the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star event is in full swing. The Tide will have 4 verbal commits on Team Alabama and 1 verbal commit in Kadarius Callaway on Team Mississippi, who is expected to play on both sides of the football for the Mississippi All-Stars. I have had an opportunity to catch up with multiple Tide commits this week so far, including the Tide's 5-star athlete commit, JaQuincy McKinstry, who is one of the standout guys in this particular event so far. He told me he is ready to sign with the Crimson Tide. He is ready to get to business in Tuscaloosa. Be sure to check out my article and my interview with the recent state champion who helped lead the Pennsylvania Indians to a 3rd state championship in 4 years on last week in Bryant-Denny Stadium. He is quickly back to work in Montgomery on this week, so be sure to check out that article over at touchdowналabama.com and some of our other coverage from the event as well. I also recently caught up with the Tide's 2022 4-star linebacker commit, Robert Williams head coach at Williamson High School in Dedrick Sumter. He told me that Williams had a masterful junior season. If you guys have not had an opportunity to see his highlights, be sure to check out Robert Williams' junior highlights as he put together a pretty impressive junior campaign. Sumter told me that Williams came back 2 times better. He was able to control games by himself, in the words of Sumter. Be sure to check out that interview over at touchdowналabama.com as well. With the early signing period officially less than a week away, as it will begin on next Wednesday, a couple of Tide commits have made it clear that they are signing with the Tide via social media, including the Tide's 2021 4-star quarterback commit, Jaylen Miro, who feels a need for the Crimson Tide as Nick Saban wants to bring in at least 1 quarterback in each recruiting cycle. So that is good news for the Tide as well. They are expected to sign a good number of recruits on next Wednesday, so I'm pretty sure Tide fans are excited to make things official with a couple of the Tide's top commits here in this 2021 recruiting class. Now I am going to dive into some of the rumblings, some of the talks, and some of the rumors that are out there about the Tide in their early signing period recruiting efforts. This is something that we have expected to happen. This is something that I've said constantly on the process, that we are expected to have a lot of different rumors, a lot of different things being said around this time. This is not unusual, so I want to dive into a couple of those on this episode of The Process. So that is what we are going to dive into next. Let's get this discussion started with a recruit who I actually talked to earlier this week in Armani Goodwin, the 4-star running back out of here at Trussville High School, who decommitted from Auburn last month. He told me that he had a close relationship with the Tide's coaching staff, including the Tide's defensive back coach, Carl Scott. He also told me that a couple of Tide players were actually recruiting him to get him to Tuscaloosa, and they are his former teammates in Malachi Moore, Paul Tyson, and Pierce Quick, who played with Goodwin at here at Trussville High School. Before I dive deeper into Goodwin and his recruitment and some of the things he told me, I want to make it clear that the Tide do not need a running back in the 2021 recruiting class. I think that is pretty obvious after they landed 3 running backs in the 2020 recruiting class in Kyle Edwards, Jace McClellan, and also Wardell Williams. Killian Robinson is also expected to come back to Tuscaloosa next season, as he opted out of this season due to concerns over COVID-19, of course. But when you look at the Tide's 2021 running back recruiting efforts, they could add a running back. It is possible. It's not out of the question entirely, but they do not need a running back. It is not one of their top priorities. But when you look at Goodwin, he is a guy who could push his commitment in his signing back to the traditional signing period, which could give the Tide an opportunity if the opportunity presents itself. With recruiting and everything moving so fluently, things could change for the Crimson Tide and may want a running back in this 2020 recruiting class once the traditional signing period rolls around, and Armani Goodwin could be a guy that is still on the board, and he said he has that close relationship with Alabama, and that could be a possibility. So that is something to just pay attention to if Goodwin chooses to sign during the traditional signing period and the opportunity presents itself. It is important to note that Goodwin has a top 4 currently of Alabama, LSU, Georgia, and Florida State. On the first practice of the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star event, he was decked out in LSU gear. He had the LSU gloves. He had the LSU undershirt. And I think LSU is a huge player in his recruitment. But I think it is also interesting, and something to point out is that LSU is in a bit of an uncertain predicament with the current state of their program, and that could impact their recruiting efforts for multiple recruits here in this 2021 recruiting class, including recruits who the Tide and the Tigers are still trying to battle it out for here in this 2021 recruiting cycle. Looking at guys like Brian Thomas Jr., the 4-star wide receiver out of Louisiana. I have talked about him a couple of times on the process. This is a lengthy, strong, physical wide receiver, a guy who brings a lot to the football field. The Tide could really benefit from adding him to their impressive wide receiver group. They showed a lot of interest in Xavier Worthy during this recruiting cycle. They have continued to show that interest in him. With them showing interest in Worthy and Thomas, that shows me that they want to add another wide receiver to this 2021 recruiting class, and Brian Thomas Jr. is one of those guys. With LSU facing this uncertain future, that could open the door even more for the Tide in their push for Brian Thomas Jr., another guy who is pushing his signing possibly all the way back to the traditional signing period as well. So that is just a couple of things to pay attention to for the next couple of months, possibly not just during the early signing period, because these are 2 guys in Brian Thomas Jr. and Armani Goodwin who could push their signings back all the way to the traditional signing period. So a lot of things are going on when it comes to the Tide's recruiting efforts. Another guy to pay attention to is actually an LSU commit at the moment, and that guy is 4-star defensive end Keno Cote out of Vero Beach, Florida. We actually got some information about Cote, and that information points at him possibly reopening his recruitment, and the Tide could be a player for this impressive defensive end out of Florida. This is something that I have talked about a couple of weeks on the process as well. The Tide wants to add some defensive linemen in this 2021 recruiting class. They want to close out this class with possibly a couple of defensive linemen. And if Cote is back on the market, he is a guy to pay attention to, with the Tide trying to add that defensive line talent. So that is another note to pay attention to. One of those rumblings, one of those rumblings, just a couple of the things that is being said around the Tide's recruiting efforts here in this 2021 recruiting class, heading into the early signing period. Another defensive line prospect who is considering the Tide is Tumashe Adelie. I want to confirm some information about his announcement. He will actually not announce his commitment on National Signing Day. He will sign during the early signing period. He will sign during this window, but he will actually make his announcement on December 17th. That is that Thursday. He will make his announcement on the day after National Signing Day, so Tide fans will possibly have to wait to Thursday to hear what Adelie has to say, see what his announcement will be. So there's some confirmation that I wanted to provide you guys with. He did tell that at touchdownalabama.com, so be sure to check out that article as well. But those are a couple of those rumblings, some of the things that I am hearing heading into the early signing period for the Crimson Tide. A lot of more information is expected to come out over the next couple of days here, as the early signing period is less than a week away. But that is what I wanted to provide you guys with today on The Process. That will put a bow on this episode of The Process. Be sure to hit that like button before you leave. Also subscribe if you're not subscribed to touchdownalabama.com. Then head over to Touchdown Alabama. Pick up that subscription. With that subscription, you will be able to read all of our subscriber only articles. Get your hands on our yearly print magazine issue. Also read our in-depth draft projections on each Tide player who is eligible to declare for the NFL draft. Also be sure to pick up that subscription so you can read our in-depth scouting reports on each Tide commit in each recruiting class. Then head to the Google Play Store if you have an Android device, or head to the Google Play Store if you have an Apple device, and download the Touchdown Alabama app so breaking news notifications can be sent to your mobile device. As always, I am Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama.